It's good to see everyone here this morning. We continue our series called Answers for Atheists. I thought I'd start off this morning by sharing a time when I got to go skiing in the Colorado Rockies. Anybody been out west into the Colorado Rockies? It's a beautiful place to be. My father and I went out there with some friends. We went to Steamboat Springs, Colorado. We had flown all the way there. We were ready to ski. We got our equipment on. We got our lift ticket the first day. We got on the lift, and it got to the top of the mountain, and we got off the lift, and instead of skiing, we stopped. And the reason we stopped was because even though we were there to ski, we looked out from the top of that mountain, and we could look over the Colorado Rockies, and it had snowed the night before, so there was fresh powder, but the sun was shining, the blue sky against the mountains and against the snow, and it was breathtaking. And sometimes you just have to stop and appreciate what is there and recognize the beauty that is around us. Have you ever had a moment like that? You know what I'm talking about, when you have those moments where you just recognize the beauty of the world? And it's in that moment that my dad and I also had one of our mini theological discussions. And I won't go into the whole discussion, but I remember this one thing that he said, you can understand now why the Native Americans believed in a great spirit. Because if you stood here on a regular basis, or you lived in these woods on a regular basis, you would recognize the beauty of creation all around you. And it would point you to someone beyond yourself. Now, many atheists argue that we invent God, that we make God up. I would say that we recognize God. We don't invent God. That there are cues in our world and in ourselves that point us to our Creator, that say there is a God, and that our appreciation for beauty in the world is actually one of those cues, our ability to appreciate it. It's our recognition that there is someone who is bigger than us. It's the recognition that there is a creator. It's not the invention of a creator. And there's a difference between inventing God and recognizing God, or recognizing God's handiwork, or recognizing the fingerprints of God, or recognizing the evidence of a creator. There's a difference between invention and recognition. And I would say that we recognize God. Every time we recognize the beauty of our earth and world, we're recognizing the creator. Paul was saying that in Romans chapter 1 when he wrote that. He says, "For what can be known about God is plain to them, because God has shown it to them. Ever since the creation of the world, his eternal power and divine nature, invisible though they are, have been understood and seen through the things he has made." That the creation is acting as a signpost to God. It's a pointer to God. It's saying, there's a creator here. Look at this. And appreciate what God has created. This is what theologians call natural revelation, that if nothing else, we can at least see that signpost to God in our creation. And interestingly enough, every culture can do that. Every society, every culture, every race, no matter where you live on this planet, we all can recognize the beauty of creation, no matter where we live. And all cultures and all societies recognize it. It's a universal recognition within all humanity. And that's what Paul is saying. All of us have at least that ability to recognize that. I like the way Alistair McGrath, who I've been reading to prepare for this series in his book, Why God Won't Go Away, he says this: beauty bypasses rational analysis by appealing to something far deeper within us. When we recognize beauty, that's a deeper level of appreciation. It goes right by rational analysis. It's just something we recognize. It's intuitive. It's instinctual. Just like when I stood on that mountaintop in Colorado and stopped. And I wasn't thinking about skiing anymore. I was thinking about the beauty. I was recognizing God's beauty in creation. Now, Paul also mentions here that when we do that, we're recognizing not only beauty, but we're recognizing the divine nature of God. And actually, scientists have actually helped us with this as they study the universe and as we learn more. Science has really helped us to understand and appreciate what they call the fine-tuning of the universe. That the universe appears to be finely tuned. It's like somebody set all the controls just right for you and I to exist here. And if you take, for example, the law of gravity or the speed of light, or you take the electromagnetic coupling, or the masses of certain elementary particles. Remember, sorry to bore you here, but do you remember the periodic table in chemistry class, right? You change any one of those things ever so slightly, and guess what happens? Guess what happens? We're not here. We don't exist. The universe doesn't exist. It all goes away if you change one of those things or the combination of things ever so slightly. It's like they're just put together just right, if that makes any sense. What the scientists call it is, or what Francis Collins has called it, he calls it the fine-tuning of the universe, that's what we have. And if you think about this a little bit further to kind of help us understand the complexity and the design of the universe, how many people have ever heard of Frank Lloyd Wright? You ever heard of Frank Lloyd Wright? Yeah, and you've ever seen a Frank Lloyd Wright house? I have not been to one personally, but this is one of the ones that you can take a look at. It's called Falling Waters, and I think it's in Pennsylvania. Someone told me this morning. He died in 1959, and he built these houses, and people bought his house, and they sell for quite a bit of money to live in them, but they're not custom made, let's put it that way. They are, but they aren't. They're custom made to the architect, not to the buyer. Does that make sense? So you don't go to Frank Lloyd Wright and say, hey, I like the bathroom here, or I like this wall here, or I like the family room over here. Frank Lloyd Wright, that's not what happens. You get the house that Frank Lloyd Wright builds and designs and creates. And he creates it with beauty in mind, and he designs it, and he's the architect of it. Now, does Frank Lloyd Wright live in this house? No. They didn't bury his body in the walls of the house. You couldn't dig him up out of the basement or anything, hopefully. And there are some things, if you were to live in the house, so you would live in the house, but you wouldn't ever see or meet the architect of the house, even though you lived in it. And as you lived in that house, you might want to change things around, wouldn't you? Like, why is all this running water all the time? I feel like I have to go to the bathroom a lot, Things like that. Or I wish the kitchen were bigger, or I wish we had marble top, we would think, I want this to be convenient for me, right? It's a similar way. God didn't create the universe for our convenience. But God created it with beauty in mind. Frank Lloyd Wright created it with beauty in mind. The other thing about this house is, and the other thing about science and the universe and understanding the universe is, what if you only could understand the house and its design from living within it? What if you could never step outside the house and look at it from the outside? You would be very limited in your understanding of the architect and very limited in your understanding of how it was created because you could only study it from within. And you could see evidence within the house that there was an architect, right? You'd say, well, somebody must have thought this up. But you could, even though you didn't know it, even though you didn't never meet the architect, but you could make sense of it. But that's the thing about us. We can only understand the universe from within. None of us can step outside the universe and see it from without. We can't make sense of it from that perspective. That's God's perspective. So that's the other thing that makes this understanding hard, but yet we can start to see in these cues that there is an architect. We can see in the cues and in the evidence and in the fingerprints that there was an architect, someone who created this. I was talking to Paul Behrens this week, who's a scientist, a member of our church and a scientist, a biologist, and he shared with me a quote from a colleague, and his colleague, Dr. Vinjamori, said this. He said, knowing a little science can lead you away from God, but knowing a lot of science brings you closer to God. That's so true, isn't it? That a little science, we can find ways to say, God, you don't exist. But once we start to dig deeper at the complexity of the world, the fine-tuning of the universe, the beauty around us, we start to realize, oh my, there's got to be a creator. So that's one of the cues that cues us in to want to find God. I think the other thing that Paul hints at here in the text And he says, he starts off really talking about the ungodliness and wickedness in the world. And Paul is starting to set us up and say, we all also universally understand that this world is not as we would hope it would be. It doesn't seem to work the way that it was intended to work. It's like there's a creation, but it's not as it should be. Some things just aren't right with the world. And that universal sense of what we would call this sense of desire for moral values, it's that our desire for moral values and for right and wrong and for things to be right and to be put right, that sense within us is also another cue to the desire to know God. We want things to be right. That's what Paul is starting to allude to. He wants the world to be set right. And I think that's another cue. But Alistair McGrath, who, again, from his book, Why God Won't Go Away, raises this great question. He said, can the idea of stable, objective moral values be sustained without belief in a transcendent reality such as the Christian God? So what he's questioning is saying, if we have moral values, if we have a sense of right and wrong, if we have some morality, what's the basis of that morality? What's the justification for that morality? What is the foundation for that morality? And so the options are, you can form a morality based on what we decide is moral, right? So we as human beings could take a vote and decide what we think is moral. We could come up with some kind of idea, and we could rule ourselves, so to speak, and come up with what is good and right. And that's actually what the atheists argue, that really that our moral understanding is just what human society has decided. And it should be up to human society and evolution to decide that for the future. There's an inherent problem with that, because there's the foundation of that is us. And we're not perfect. And we don't always get it right. In fact, we choose to do immoral things. And because of that, our foundation can shift. A great example of this, or an extreme example of this, is actually the totalitarian rule and government during Nazi Germany. The Nazi Germans had set up a moral system based on scientific thought, their understanding of genetics at the time, their understanding of evolutionary theory at the time, and basically they said, we're going to be the arbitrators of our own moral understanding and judgment, and based on that understanding and based on what we know about science and what we know about evolution, we're going to say that this group of people is inferior and this group of people is superior, and we can even make a better group of people based on their understanding. And so they became the arbitrators of their moral code. Does that make sense? And because they determined value and worth in people, they said it's okay. They felt it was morally just, morally right for them to get rid of a certain group of people because they felt they were genetically inferior. Does that make sense? I'm not saying to agree with it. I'm saying that that's how they set up their system of moral judgment. And so they said, we're going to get rid of this group of people because we believe morally it's wrong to have them continue to exist. And so you see how when we humans create our own moral system, right, we don't always get it right. Take it a step further here. How many people have ever built a sandcastle? Have you ever played in the sand? If you haven't, get out there. Go to the beach this week, something. And take a trip to the beach. And you build a sandcastle. And, we've all done this. We've maybe done it with our kids. And they build the sandcastle on the beach. And we spend all day building it with the moat and everything and protect it from the tides. And some are more elaborate than others. But whatever it looks like, it's great, right? We like it. We value it. And we go home that day and we go back, or maybe we're staying there for a few days. So we go back to our hotel or wherever we're staying, and we come back to the beach the next day, and because we're all like church people, we go to the same spot on the beach, just like the same spot in church. We all sit in the same spot at the beach, just like we sit at the same spot in church. It's just some human nature. And we go there, and we sit down, and then we go, and we find that our sandcastle has been destroyed. Not by the tide, but we can see the footprint marks of somebody who tromped through our sandcastle. And we see that, and we think to ourselves, man, that's not right. We don't like it, right? I heard that. It probably was Spencer. You're right. But anyway, so you think I don't see and hear everything from up here? Yeah. So better watch it. Better watch it, Jamie Hess. You better watch it, buddy. All right. So caught you. Passing notes in class today. All right. Where are we at now? We're at the sandcastle, right? All right, we're back there. So we're at the sandcastle. You're upset. Now here's this. What's the difference? The person the sandcastle has value to who? To me, right? The creator of the sandcastle. The sandcastle has no value to the person who does not know the creator. Does that make sense? The reason they destroy it is because it's there, and they've made a value judgment, and they say it's not worth anything because they don't know the creator. They've never seen the creator. They've never met the creator. They don't know that you made it. Or if maybe they did know you created and they don't like you, and so they're going to destroy it anyway. You see what I'm saying? But value comes from being created. And our value and our worth, you and I, as each of us have value and worth because we are created by God. And once we take that foundation away, then who decides who's worth what? It's God who has already decided that you're valuable. It is God that's already decided you're worth Jesus. Because God created you, you have value, inherent worth because of who created you and me. And that's the foundation of our morality. And that's what is part of that. When we take God out of that equation, we just become destroyers. And it becomes like shifting sand. In fact, Jesus said that. He laid out in his Sermon on the Mount, he gave a lot of moral teaching. He said, live your life this way. And at the end of that sermon, he says, at the end of the sermon, and everyone who hears these words of mine and does not act on them will be like a foolish man who built his house on sand. And when we become the arbitrators of our own morality and value and what's important, not important, we're shifting sand. Human society and culture, we are shifting sand. Nazi Germany was a shifting sand, and they had to get it back right again, and they did. But it's with God that happens, not without. So these are cues, this beauty, this complexity, this desire for things to be right when we sense that they're wrong in the world, are all cues to us, pointing us to God. They're directing us. They're saying, this way to God, this way to find God. It's like a homing pigeon, which is really the title of the sermon, our homing instinct. Homing pigeons, carrier pigeons that carry messages, they've been used for millennia to transport messages. And you can take a homing pigeon, right? And you can take this pigeon, and really they do have a mental roadmap. I'm going to explain that here. But you take a homing pigeon, you can take that homing pigeon 1,100 miles away from its home to a place it's never been before, never seen before, never known before, never experienced before, and it will find its way home. How does it do that? Well, it actually acts on several cues from the environment, from the world around it, that it uses to hone in or home in on the home, on its roost. One of the things that a carrier pigeon has that you and I don't have is it has a higher concentration of iron in its beak. And they believe that iron concentration may act as a compass to use or as they fly around, and so they know when they're going in a certain direction. They also use what's called olfactory navigation. They sense smells in the environment, and they use that to navigate. They also use their sight to navigate, and that sight, they recognize mountains, rivers, roads. They'll pick up on geographical cues to help them go home, and then they also depend on, I'm going to make sure I get this one right, infrasound. Low-frequency infrasound, that's below 20 hertz. I think it's below human hearing. But those sounds also become cues for them as to how to get home. So what they do is they use all these cues to make a mental map in their small little bird brains of how to get home. And if birds can do it, I think we can. And I think what I'm talking about is beauty, complexity, fine-tuning, moral rightness. These are all cues that God has put in our universe to help us to find God. They're all signposts to God this way. The problem is, we're GPS people. You know, we want a GPS. We want put in the address and just tell me exactly what I'm supposed to do to get here, right? That's what we want, right? We want the GPS, and God is giving us a homing system. Remember I said it wasn't created for our convenience? Remember that part? But God is saying, look at these cues. Appreciate these things. Look to these things, and they're like beacons to God. And that's what we see around us. That's our homing instinct that directs us back to find God. Now, what happens to some of us is we give up on that. We fly a few hundred miles and we haven't found home, so we just roost right where we are and we say, I think I'll just stay here. I give up. And yet we're not home yet. And we all instinctively know we're not home yet. And we know that because there's a part of us that's empty. There's a part of us that we know is missing. There's like a missing piece to us. And we only know this intuitively, instinctually. Blaise Pascal, who was a well-known mathematician, physicist, and philosopher, said this. He said, the infinite abyss, he was talking about that emptiness we feel, this infinite abyss can only be filled with something that is infinite and unchanging. In other words, by God himself. God alone is our true good. What Pascal was saying is that you and I have this like emptiness, this hole, he calls it, what I love about it is he calls it an infinite abyss. And how do you fill up something that's infinitely empty? The only way you can fill it is with something that's infinite. And God is infinite. But what do we try and do in our humanness to fill that void, that gap within us? What do we try and do? We try and fill it up with other things. And I think you this morning know what those things are. In fact, I'm going to give you an opportunity to tell me what those things are. What are they? What are the things or the stuff or whatever it is that we try and do to fill that empty place in our lives? What do we do? Go ahead. I know some of you got this. Sports. What's that? Purchases. Shopping. Food. Yeah, you love that. That cheeseburger is really great for like 5 minutes, you know, and then the abyss is there again, you know. It's like, activities, busyness. What else? Relationships that never fully satisfy. I heard money over here. Somebody say money. What else? Work. Sleep. Right. Coffee. Amen, sister. We're in confession mode right now, if you didn't know that. Chocolate, right. Don't go there. How about wine, alcohol, drugs, video games, entertainment? These are all ways we're just trying to fill that place up when there's only one person that will fill it. There's only one being in the universe that will fill it, and that's God. God is the only one that can meet us in that place. The Bible talks about giving us a peace which passes all understanding. And isn't that what we really long for? That peace within us that is beyond our understanding, that we just know that God is there. And the good news is God wants to be there. God's not trying to hide. God is not trying to run away from us. God actually wants to be there in our lives. God actually wants to fill that void within us. All we simply need to do, which is clear in Scripture, is say, God, here I am. And invite God to fill that void. To invite God into our lives and allow God to be the one who fills that gap. Amen? Amen.